There are moments in life that arrive without warning, moments that do not ask whether we are ready, and when they come, they do not leave anything unchanged. The loss of someone we love is one such moment, where a presence that once felt inseparable from our life suddenly becomes unreachable, and what remains is not silence alone, but a space filled with memories that continue to speak. It is in this space that grief begins, not as a single emotion, but as a movement that touches every part of our being, where the mind struggles to accept and the heart struggles to let go. There are times when it feels as though the person is still here, where a voice, a gesture, or a familiar place brings them back so vividly that for a brief moment, nothing seems to have changed. And then, in the very next moment, the reality returns, and the absence becomes even more intense, because it reminds us that what we are holding cannot be reached again in the same way. This is the nature of grief, where love continues, yet the form through which it was expressed is no longer present. The pain that arises in such moments is not something separate from love, but an extension of it, because we grieve deeply only when we have loved deeply. It is not weakness, and it is not something to be overcome quickly, because it carries within it the truth of what was shared. There are questions that arise in this space that do not have clear answers, where the mind asks where they have gone, whether they still exist in some form, and why something so meaningful had to come to an end. These questions have been asked across generations, not because they can be answered easily, but because they arise from a place that seeks to understand what lies beyond what we can see. If we pause for a moment and look carefully, one thing becomes clear. What we loved was never limited to the physical form alone. It was not only the body that we loved, but the presence that animated it, the awareness that expressed itself through it, and the unique way in which that presence touched our life. When the body is no longer here, it creates a sense of finality. Yet the question remains whether what we truly loved can be reduced to something that simply ends. If we look closely at life itself, we begin to see that what we call death is not something that happens only once, but something that is quietly present in every moment. Because within the body, countless cells are constantly coming to an end, while new ones take their place. This process is not experienced as loss, but as renewal, where what appears as an ending at one level becomes a continuation at another, and life moves forward through this constant exchange without interruption. In this sense, death is not separate from life, but is woven into its very movement, where forms dissolve and re-emerge in ways that are not always visible to us. When this is seen, even in a simple way, the idea of death as a sudden and absolute ending begins to soften, because it becomes clear that what we call life has always included this silent transformation within it. In many traditions, life is not seen as something that begins at birth and ends at death, but as a continuous movement, where forms arise and dissolve, while something deeper remains beyond these changes. This is not something that can be proved in the way we prove material things, yet it is something that has been felt, explored, and reflected upon across centuries. When this possibility is allowed, even slightly, the idea of death begins to change. It is no longer seen as a complete ending, but as a transition that we do not fully understand, where what was once expressed in a visible form moves into a dimension that is not accessible in the same way. This does not remove the pain, because the heart longs for what it is known, yet it introduces a different quality into grief, where sorrow is no longer held alone, but is accompanied by a sense of quiet openness. In that openness, something begins to soften. The need to hold on begins to loosen, and the struggle against what has happened begins to reduce, not because the loss becomes smaller, but because our relationship with it begins to change. We begin to see that holding them in our pain does not bring them closer, and that resisting their departure does not change what has already unfolded. Instead, what becomes possible is a different gesture. To remember them not only through sorrow, but through gratitude, where each memory becomes a reflection of what was given and received. To feel their presence not as something that has vanished, but as something that has moved beyond the form we were familiar with. And then, slowly, a deeper understanding begins to arise. Just as they have moved forward in this journey of life, we too are moving in the same direction, moment by moment, breath by breath. And what feels distant today is something we will one day encounter ourselves. This is not a thought to create fear, but a recognition that life is shared in its entirety, including its transitions. When this is seen, even gently, something profound begins to shift. The idea of separation becomes less absolute, and the sense of loss begins to carry within it a quiet continuity. And from this space, a different kind of farewell becomes possible. Instead of holding them with tears alone, one begins to release them with a sense of peace, wishing them well in whatever lies beyond, allowing them to move forward without the weight of our sorrow. Because if there is any continuation, any journey beyond what we see, then what we offer them through our heart matters. To hold them in pain may deepen our suffering, yet to let them go with love creates a space where both the one who has departed and the one who remains can rest in a certain quietness. And perhaps this is the most beautiful way to say goodbye. Not with resistance, not with the feeling that something has been taken away, but with a gentle smile that carries both love and understanding, where we acknowledge what was, accept what is, and allow what will be. Because in the end, death does not erase what has been lived. It does not take away what has been shared. It does not end what was real. It simply changes the way it continues. And in that understanding, grief does not disappear, but it transforms, where sorrow and love begin to exist together, not as opposites, but as expressions of the same connection that remains, even when the form is gone.